Well, I really don't think anyone is crazy enough to seriously believe that normal people use expressions like that in their everyday language. It's more about trying to intimidate others. So they want to make it clear to them that there are problems here of the greatest magnitude. And since you are apparently too stupid, even just to repeat what we say to you, you apparently have to realize that we, as the elite, as the avant-garde, are the ones who are decisive in solving the relevant social problems.
After this interview, I was absolutely shocked, and it actually answers so many questions for me. Namely, why are there still so many people in Germany today who, among other things, vote for the SPD and CDU, even though they know very well that these parties are completely responsible for the misery of recent years and decades? And people still believe that these two parties will lead them out of the crisis. That's exactly what today's video is about. And if you want to support this channel, I would of course be really happy about a like and a subscription. We're going to watch this interview where I still have to say, sometimes I just can't explain people's stupidity.
It's also the other way around. Politics toward one's own population depends very, very much on how it is presented linguistically. So how do you sell your own policies? How does a government sell its policies to its own people? That determines how people react to it, whether they angrily swallow what they're being spoon-fed or what they're being offered, or whether they accept it as a reasonable development or as a necessary, inevitable development.
That point he's making has crossed my mind so many times, and feel free to write below what you think about such a statement. If someone tried to sell me that and said, okay, we're saving everywhere, we're cutting back on foreign development, we're cutting back on foreign subsidies, we're also cutting back on forest protection, on all sorts of things, then I could handle that and I would put it aside. But when I hear, on the other hand, that we're spending 1 million, a single tree we plant in Berlin or Baden-Württemberg costs 18,000 euros. And on the other hand, I hear, yeah, the family coverage benefit will be gone. Then it's not explained reasonably, and that's when people's hatred toward this government increases. Why does a tree have more value than, for example, a mother who tries to raise her children at home? Why does everything always have to be completely exaggerated? And why do they have to lie to us from start to finish? People out there aren't stupid. And that also becomes clear again, which is exactly what personally bothered me so much about this interview. I edited down the entire hour and a half for you, I think, to about 35 to 40 minutes.
To find ways to sell their politics, and that's often extremely ridiculous, right? So all these long-winded law names that the Grand Coalition keeps coming up with, like the Good Housing Act or something, I mean, that's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, especially that it's a left-wing thing. It's a left-wing topic, of course, because leftists usually have a strong educational background. So they are high school students, they are students, and often even work in academic professions. That means speaking language, writing, reading, talking is more or less their everyday life.
Exactly, and while natural sciences and everything that has to do with mathematics, for example, are still shaped in a rather conservative way. For years I really was caught between those two sides, but above all, I also saw how many people were weeded out because, for example, they were conservative. Today, mathematics is being discontinued in Lower Saxony schools, and financial education, you hardly find that anywhere anymore. Back then, there was already very little of that, or who really knows about the stock market, for example, to generate income or simply to supplement their retirement income. No, many people are just absolutely terrified of it.
That you become immune to it and can tell yourself, I'm normal and that's a good thing. So I do think it makes sense that it would be possible to reclaim it in a positive way with complete openness. So I think that would be a reasonable strategy.
Then let's just go ahead and do it. For example, how could you start completely safely, without money and without risk, to see if the stock market is something for you? And of course, I have something up my sleeve again, and that is Ultima Markets, a regulated broker in England under the FCA, and at the same time a sponsor of the football club Inter Milan. And now I'm going to show you my logo here. No risk, and also my no risk roadmap. And it's super easy and super simple. Just enter your information here. Since we already did this in the last video, I can't do it again now. Now you just click on open account here. Select demo account. Choose either standard or raw. Just pick your currency, in this case, euro. Enter any leverage here, set aside 100,000 euros and just try the whole thing out. At the same time, I would definitely recommend that if you want to start with 50 euros or more, you should also claim the deposit bonus. Take part in the Ultimate Traders Cup that starts at 250 euros. And the prize drawing, yes, you can even take part in the prize drawings if you want to deposit 250 euros. And in my opinion, that's the easiest, simplest, and above all, the most reasonable way. Get yourself a demo account and make a smooth transition. Start with 50 euros, play around with it a bit. It doesn't cost you anything. Maybe just a little bit of your time. And down below you'll find a link. And very important, always check out the promo page. They sometimes have really awesome deals. Important at this point, I do not provide investment advice. Trading leverage products involves certain risks. And please always keep in mind, trading leverage products does not guarantee any profits no matter what anyone tells you. Click now on the link below in the description and feel free to check out the playlist below again. There you'll be guided step by step on how you can start perfectly.
Instead, it tries to intimidate. Well, I don't think the crazy advanced seminar participants who talk about things like people of color or you have to help me LBTKU, I can't get it right.
LGBTQ, very good.
Thank you very much. So I don't really think anyone is crazy enough to seriously believe that normal people would use such expressions in their everyday language. Instead, the goal is to intimidate. So they want to make it clear to you that there are problems here of the greatest magnitude that require such terms. I think expressions like that require such terms are not used in everyday language. Even just repeating what we tell you to say, you must obviously realize that we, as the elite, as the avant-garde, are decisive here in solving the relevant social problems.
And that's the huge problem in the entire overall context. It only creates even more problems because people here in Germany are simply no longer willing to just turn their brains off and say, yes, I'll accept all of this. And if there's a Christopher Street Day out there and everyone is running around with rainbow flags and there are counter demonstrators, then that's just as objectionable as, for example, if it's any other protest. If there's a march through Germany and left-wing counter demonstrators are there and it leads to riots, both are wrong, and at the same time they see that only one side is always being hunted. And that's the big problem, that people suddenly see through social media like, hey, wait a minute, something's not right here. Is it that, as we've always said, they're just trying to pull the wool over our eyes?
Those of the right or the conservatives, the bourgeois, against this one-sided leftist dominance of language. But as I said, it's not that easy because the amplifying effect of public broadcasters is still very strong, especially when it comes to repetition, the possibility of constant repetition. You just mentioned the term renewable energy. For an ordinary person, it's almost impossible to even question the term, to consider it problematic in any way. Because I would say that the left or the Greens have also managed to do that, right? To coin a term that is viewed entirely positively and where no one senses any problem at all with this term. Well, there's an absolute taboo around this term.
And you'll find out what happens if you want to get out of it now in a moment. However, renewable energy also carries significant risks. For example, it has just come out that renewable energy is clogging up the power grids because they can't be regulated. That means that renewable energy, because we don't have any storage capacity, is costing us countless billions every year. And at the same time, yes, interventions in the power grid have to be made thousands of times, which, for example, we don't have with nuclear power. But if we go against this leftist propaganda and say, for example, we urgently need nuclear power plants in Vienna, yes, then all hell breaks loose. And just listen for yourselves.
Our expertise, our critical faculties can very easily be neutralized, yes, even switched off by strong emotions. And when you address these emotions, when you stir them up, then our critical thinking doesn't work properly anymore. And we let ourselves get carried away into behavior we would otherwise never allow ourselves. Or if you go to a pop event, to a pop concert, you also feel inside yourself that things start happening, how should I put it, dynamics arise that you can no longer control rationally. So you don't want to control things rationally anymore.
I just experienced this situation again a few days ago during a campaign appearance. I've spoken to my own bubble before. I think the biggest crowd I ever had was 54,000 people in the Munich Olympic Hall. You can Google it, that was at a Jürgen Höller event. There, I gave a talk about my former company. But just 2 or 3 weeks ago, as I told you, I was at the campaign kickoff and I was really annoyed. There were so many people who asked questions to a member of parliament, even though he had actually laid out the ground rules beforehand. And at some point I got so annoyed by everything that I stood up and asked an informed technical question, and that's when my thinking stopped again. Of course, I had prepared a question beforehand, and well, it somehow disappeared from my mind, so I definitely know what that's like. This rational thinking stops exactly when you're not in your usual environment, and that's exactly what people take advantage of. And you probably know this too. At some point, even if it's just at the store and it's absolutely packed, a certain dynamic develops. Anyway, if you know exactly what I'm talking about, please write it below.
And because that's just how it is, and propaganda uses that, it always works. It's just that it uses increasingly sophisticated means, and of course we wouldn't use propaganda today the way the GDR did.
Yes.
That's considered primitive today. I would say that what happens today, for example, on Tagesschau is a much more sophisticated form of propaganda, although ancient techniques still work, of course.
If you don't know them, there's this public broadcasting block, right? They keep going over it again and again, explaining what it's all about. This constant propaganda, something is always taken out of context. On the other side, something is always being spun. Or AI videos are used, deliberate falsehoods are spread. And if you try to defend yourself against it, then you're seen as the ultimate enemy. And even the courts reject it. Exactly. To stop paying for this propaganda state apparatus, even though, well, it's now been proven that parts of it are lying media outlets. But if you talk to older people now who only have this medium because they've been using it for 50, 60, 70 years, then you'll notice that they're trapped in that bubble because they're caught up in the entire propaganda apparatus. Because they can't see beyond their own little world anymore. Maybe they'll open YouTube or something like that once in a while. Even there are a lot of, I really have to say it, fake channels and of course influencers who are on the other side, constantly waving around their so-called facts. But you think to yourself, yeah, I don't care about your facts at all. First, I only live once, and second, I just want to live peacefully and sensibly. And I'm not interested in your facts. I just don't care about facts because I have an opinion. And my opinion is different from your facts. And as long as I have my opinion first, I'm allowed to express my criticism about it. And if I reject these self-imposed rules of life, then you have to deal with it. Because that's expressing an opinion. And that's exactly where this game begins, why people are still so stupid, among other things. SPD, and they got it too.
In that respect, it's probably an eternal struggle between enlightenment or critical rationality and propaganda. Exactly, and that's what I was getting at, because there is also a need for propaganda. So I don't think we should imagine it as if there are just some bad guys out there, or some terrible devilish elite trying to make people stupid or turn them into fanatics for some political agenda through propaganda. That does exist too, but that's not what's crucial for the success of propaganda. Propaganda is successful because people are susceptible to it.
And because people need that, because we all need that, and none of us can really separate ourselves from it. Because people need that, because many people either want someone to see as the enemy. I deliberately avoid propaganda on my channel, but I do use this tool, for example, in the headlines and also in the thumbnails. I'll briefly explain to you why. If I don't do that, the videos don't get clicked. Then I end up with 2, 3, 4, maybe 500 views on a video like that, and I also get a lot of pressure from our committee. The thumbnails are extreme, harsh, intense, escalation, unbelievable, this happened, that happened. What I usually explain in the first 30 to 45 seconds, then these videos quickly get over 1,000 views. If the headline also sounds threatening, like bomb about to explode, 24 hours left, this or that, then these automatically get more clicks. But people don't complain about it. Sure, there are always 1 or 2 exceptions. Those are the ones who also just click on the regular images. However, the reach you get, because we do have a goal with all of this. Our goal is, well, there are 63 left-wing voters in Germany. That includes everyone from the CDU to the SPD, the Greens, BSW, and then there are the remaining right-wing voters, conservative voters who are, well, to the right of the CDU. And we need these people who are still voting left on our side. So we use, for example, striking thumbnails, bold wording, and the first 10 seconds are always groundbreaking and impactful. And if I don't have anything groundbreaking, then I throw in music, images of destruction, all that unbelievable stuff. You know what I mean. To tell you about it afterwards, what my opinion is, and I try to get you on board. Because the more often you watch these videos, the more YouTube promotes the whole thing. And again to people who still don't believe the whole thing, who are still living off this state propaganda apparatus. And we saw it with the Höcke video by Ben Unscripted, where a lot of people just tuned out. They didn't want to hear any of it anymore.
People go silent in response to such feelings, like, for example, the thrill of fear or feelings like that. People go silent, Esteban. When you tell people that we are heading unstoppably toward a climate catastrophe, it triggers something in them, namely the paradoxical pleasure in fear. Especially when you live in a society like ours, where safety is very, very strongly emphasized. And so actually we live a very, very calm life, to put it mildly, which quickly leads to boredom. And when boredom is present, you start craving excitement. You become almost greedy for sensational news and even start craving fear, the feeling of being afraid, as long as you can keep it at a certain distance. This craving for fear or curiosity about sensational things can be satisfied by launching such propaganda campaigns. And with that, you can also be very successful politically in the process.
And that's exactly the crucial point, which I also use, for example. That's exactly it. This fear of what could come next, the fear of what else could happen, and above all, what we all still have as security. However, if the sense of security keeps eroding and fear keeps increasing, then at some point you can no longer control the people. And that's what we're seeing now in the poll results. 42% in Saxony, Saxony-Anhalt, or even 28% in the federal election, or now in Bavaria, which is coming up soon, that Bavaria will no longer fall below the 5% threshold. Those are the kinds of things. This fear is, on the one hand, of course, an absolute thrill. I know I've worked on the stock market for years, and on the other hand, and that's the crucial point. But when security collapses and ordinary people realizes it's getting worse and worse, then, as he said right at the beginning, it's the people who don't have this high level of formal, literal education who usually earn a bit more, who then turn against this regime, against these statements, against this propaganda as well, because they realize that's exactly what we had in the GDR. Only in the GDR you weren't allowed to say what you wanted. But in fact, almost everyone there actually had a much better life, because at least they still had this safety net, and now this safety net is disappearing. We just have to open the newspapers. Honor killing here, clan networks there, lack of housing. And when they try to submit applications themselves, you can clearly see that now fear is starting to turn into panic. That's what we use to get as many people on our side as possible. That way, we can simply do better in the next elections and put an end to this whole disaster.
And if you're no longer allowed to say what you want to say, it's hard to keep thinking differently for very long. Yeah, well, there is this beautiful, again, typically German saying that everyone knows thoughts are free. Yeah. You'd be very mistaken if you thought that thoughts are still free when you're not allowed to express them. In the long run, I don't think it's bearable to think differently than you speak. So if you force people to speak a certain language for a long enough time, then this different way of thinking also becomes almost unbearable.
That's my biggest fear, that this could happen someday. That's why there are so many people, especially among my regular viewers on YouTube. I mean, Heidi, Heike, and I don't want to list all of you now, then, or Patrick too, yes, who are so afraid of not being able to express that anymore. If I were to say everything, you know what I mean, then I would have to expect the police to show up at my house. But if Kathy Hummels says that, then it's completely legitimate and even desired in a sports context. If someone like Bowles, for example, writes on X and says Germany is rising again, like using this awakening phrase, then he gets a visit from the Office for the Protection of the Constitution. This statement that we no longer have freedom of speech. A few days ago, I made the Merkel video where she said exactly that. That lies, in this case she meant us, yes, that we deny their facts, must be punished. And that's exactly the problem, this indoctrination in your mind, which is why in this video I absolutely refrain from doing any political campaigning. That's why I absolutely avoid coming down hard on anyone here.
When politicians say things like that, I just change the word to the power of communication and say that's the biggest nonsense. Absolutely.
Yes, exactly. The power of communication is that you can talk your way out of things when someone asks a critical question, but instead they dodge it. They go off into a completely different area.
And that's the absolutely dangerous thing that's happening here right now. If I ask someone, what's the weather like outside? Yes, tomorrow it's supposed to be 30 degrees and it's going to be super hot, and over Pentecost the scorching heat could return again, then I'm distorting this picture. Instead of telling me it's rainy outside right now and it's already dark. This video has now, I think, already taken almost 6 hours. But the fact is, yes, if we want an answer, we're not going to get one anymore. They always just talk around the issue, which is something we see every day in the Bundestag. We want answers about where things go from here, and we're told, yes, then comes the autumn of reform, the summer of improvement. Now we're on our way and we'll somehow find a way. Now we're doing well. Hope to be able to implement all of this someday. That was never our question. Our question is simply, when will things get better? What are you doing about it? And that's exactly what we'll never tell you, because that would completely destroy this system.
We need communication, especially wherever there are substantive issues. And when you make a post on X or something like that, then you're not speaking, you're communicating. And in that respect, that's what we naturally expect from politicians as well, that they communicate in a factual manner. But as I said, it's now about turning communication into a defense strategy. In other words, not to be held accountable, let's put it that way. Yes, not to be held accountable for anything you communicate.
So, and the first one who really broke with this among the established mainstream parties was Friedrich Merz, who said during his campaign, "The left is over, we'll pursue centrist politics." That's why I also said, like, if you can't vote for one party, I can't say anything about political advertising here, then just go with the CDU, because for the first time broke out of this whole propaganda apparatus and said, we're going to pursue centrist politics again. We're going to stop all this nonsense, and the CSU was also involved. And then it happened that they caved in because they desperately needed a coalition partner who pushed them into a corner. And then the CDU became, yes, the same propaganda party as all the others. Why? By the way, the old government also collapsed. You can see it extremely well with Wolfgang Kubicki, among others. How did he speak on X versus in the Bundestag? Many still accused him, saying, then do something about it. But in the end, he really couldn't do anything. I don't want to sugarcoat that. He would have had to leave the party, end his political career, and take responsibility for the people. What Wolfgang Kubicki is doing now, I personally don't buy that from him, because that's my personal opinion. Now it turned out a bit shorter than I actually thought. My personal opinion is still, if someone lies once, you don't believe them, even if they're telling the truth. And of course, he can repair this relationship over the years. But that would also mean that I don't hear every week, yeah, but I didn't say it like that. I never said it like that at all. That's a vile lie. For example, when a woman with cancer approaches me and says, I want to raise my salary. If all I ever hear is that what I recorded was a lie, then that's much, much worse propaganda. And that also explains the high poll numbers, why things suddenly changed so quickly. And no, Germans have no understanding if you bring cancer patients into it. Germans have no connection to you at all when it comes to their money, especially when they also notice that their money is being wasted abroad. That's propaganda in its final stage as it collapses. And in my usual pleasant way, I actually left out everything I normally do in my videos and basically almost turned it into a podcast, I really have to say. Let me know, because if you've watched up to this point, then I know you can answer this question. Do you like this format? If so, I might do it once a week. Yeah, a video like this sometimes takes me 6 or 7 hours. You probably noticed it a bit from really bright to now almost entirely artificial lighting. Have a good morning, midday, or afternoon.